3 days before my wedding, my fiancé sat me down at the kitchen table and told me he was calling it off. No warning, no fight the night before, no sign that I can look back on now and say, oh, that was it, that was the moment it started cracking. He just sat down across from me with his hands flat on the table like he was about to present a business proposal, and he said he did not think I was the woman he thought I was. I asked him what that meant. He said he had been doing a lot of thinking, and he felt like we wanted different things, and he did not want to go into a marriage that he was not 100% sure about. I sat there for a moment. Then I asked him, very calmly, why he had waited until 72 hours before the ceremony to come to this conclusion. He said he had not wanted to hurt me sooner. I want you to understand the scale of what had already been done at that point. The venue was booked. The caterer was booked. The florist had already delivered a trial arrangement that was sitting in a vase on the counter while he said these words to me. 214 people had confirmed. My dress had been altered twice. My mother had flown in from out of state and was asleep in our guest room at that exact moment. The honeymoon, a 12-day trip to Greece, had been paid for in full 6 months earlier, non-refundable. He told me he was sorry. I told him I needed him to leave. He left. I sat at that kitchen table for about 40 minutes and did not move. Then I got up, made myself a cup of coffee, and started making a list. The list was not about him. I was not ready to think about him yet. The list was practical. Who I needed to call, what order to call them in, what could be canceled, what could be refunded, what was already gone, and I just needed to accept that. I called the venue first thing in the morning, then the caterer, then the florist, then the photographer, then the band. Each call was its own specific kind of awful. Some of the vendors were sympathetic. Some were businesslike in a way that I actually preferred because it gave me something concrete to respond to. One of them, I will not say which, got quiet on the phone and then said, "Honey, I am so sorry," in a voice that nearly undid me, and I had to put the phone down for a second before I could keep talking. I called every single person on the guest list. Not emailed, called. Because I had been raised to believe that certain things deserve a real conversation, and telling 214 people that the wedding they had already bought plane tickets and hotel rooms for was not happening in 3 days seemed like one of those things. My mother sat next to me on the couch for most of those calls. She did not say much. She refilled my coffee and handed me tissues when I needed them, and when I was done she said, "What do you need right now?" And I said I honestly do not know. Every gift that had arrived at the house I returned, every single one. I packed them back into their boxes, rewrote the labels, and drove them to the shipping center myself over 2 days. My best friend Danny came with me and carried boxes and did not once tell me everything happens for a reason, which I appreciated more than I can say. By the end of that week I had handled everything except one thing. The honeymoon. 12 days in Greece. Santorini for the first 5 nights, then a ferry to Crete, then a few days on a smaller island I had found during a deep dive research spiral 18 months earlier. I had planned it down to the hour. I had a folder on my laptop, color-coded, with restaurant reservations and ferry times and walking routes, and the names of specific beaches that faced west so we could watch the sun go down. The booking was non-refundable. I had looked into it, and even the travel insurance we had purchased would not cover cancellation for a reason like this. And even if it would have, I sat there staring at that itinerary one night, exhausted and hollow and still not fully believing any of this was real, and I thought, why am I canceling this? I had planned that trip. Every detail of it was mine. Why was I sitting here giving that up too? I did not cancel it. I went alone. I want to be honest about what that decision felt like in the moment, because looking back it seems bolder than it was. It was not bold. It was more like I had already lost so much that week that I stopped being afraid of losing more. I had canceled everything and called everyone and returned every gift and held myself together through all of it. And I think at a certain point something in me just went quiet and flat, and I thought, I am getting on that plane. Not because I was brave, because I had run out of reasons not to. My mother thought I was making a mistake. She sat across from me the night before I left at the same kitchen table where he had said what he said. And she told me gently that maybe I needed time at home to process, to be around people who loved me, to let myself fall apart in a safe place before I went out into the world again. She said grief had a way of ambushing you when you were somewhere unfamiliar and alone, and there was no one there to catch you. I told her I understood what she was saying. I told her I was going anyway. She drove me to the airport at 5 in the morning and hugged me for a long time at the departures entrance and said, "Call me when you land." And I said I would, and she said, "Call me whenever you need to, not just when you land," and I said I knew, and she said okay, and then she got back in the car. I watched her drive away, and then I went inside and checked my bag and got a coffee and sat at the gate for an hour and a half watching the boards and feeling absolutely nothing, which I think was what I needed to feel at that point. I had spent 10 days feeling everything. The nothing was almost comfortable. Danny texted me right before I boarded. The text was a single sentence: "You are the most unhinged person I have ever loved, and I mean that with complete admiration." I laughed for the first time in 10 days. It was short, but it was real. I landed in Athens on a Tuesday morning, transferred to a smaller plane, and arrived in Santorini in the early afternoon. The hotel had been booked for 2. I told them at check-in that it would just be me. The woman behind the desk did not ask questions. She handed me my key card and told me breakfast was served until 10 and the pool bar closed at midnight. I remember standing in the elevator on the way up to my room and looking at my reflection in the mirrored door and thinking, there you are. Not in a dramatic way, just a simple noticing. I had been so occupied with logistics and calls and boxes and other people's reactions that I had not actually looked at myself in about a week. I looked tired. I looked like someone who had been through something. But I also looked, I do not know how to explain this exactly, more like myself than I had in a while. Like some performance I had not known I was giving had been suspended. My room had a balcony that faced the caldera. I stood on it that first evening and looked at the water and the whitewashed buildings stacked up the hillside and the sky going orange and pink behind the volcano, and I felt a lot of things at once. Sad, yes, angry under the sadness. Relieved in a way I had not expected and did not yet fully understand. And something else that I do not have a clean word for, something like the very first breath after being underwater for a long time. I ate dinner alone at a restaurant where I had originally made a reservation for 2. The waiter brought me a complimentary glass of wine and said, "You are on holiday." I said yes. He said good and walked away. That was it. Nobody asked questions. Nobody looked at me with that particular expression I had been on the receiving end of all week, the one that was half pity and half relief that it was not happening to them. I was just a woman eating dinner on a terrace in Greece, and that anonymity felt like a gift I had not known I needed. I woke up the next morning, had breakfast on my balcony, and went to the beach. The beach I had picked was not the famous one. I had found it in a travel forum during my research phase, a smaller one on the north side of the island, accessible by a 20-minute walk down a path that most tourists did not bother with. It was rocky and quieter, and the water was that color that does not look real until you are standing in it. I got there early and found a spot and set up my towel and my book and my sunscreen, and I sat there and did something I had not done in about 10 days. Nothing. Just nothing. No calls to make, no boxes to return, no one to update. Just the water and the sun and the sound of people in the distance talking in languages I did not speak. About an hour in, someone asked if the spot next to me was taken. I looked up. It was a woman, maybe a few years older than me, with a canvas tote and a paperback and the kind of easy confidence that comes from being comfortable in your own company. I said no, go ahead. She sat up next to me and we did not speak for a while, which was fine. Then she looked over at my book and said she had read it and had thoughts, and we ended up talking for about 2 hours. Her name was Celeste. She was from Toronto. She was a landscape architect. She was also, it turned out, traveling alone, though for different reasons. She had just wrapped up a long-term project and had given herself a solo trip as a deliberate reset, something she did every few years to remember who she was outside of her work. She asked what brought me to Santorini. I told her. The whole thing. The kitchen table, the 3 days, the calls, the boxes, the non-refundable booking, all of it. I do not know why I told her. Maybe because she was a stranger and would be on a different island in 4 days and I would never see her again, and there was something freeing about that. Maybe because she had a way of listening that made you feel like your story was interesting rather than embarrassing. When I was done, she was quiet for a second and then she said, "So you canceled everything and kept the part you planned for yourself?" I said I had not thought about it that way, but yes. She said, "Good, that is the right call." We ended up spending most of the next 2 days together. Not planned, not scheduled, just running into each other at breakfast or on the same walking path and falling into conversation. She knew the island well, had been twice before, and she took me to a restaurant that was not in any guide I had found and ordered things in Greek, and we ate for 3 hours. She told me about her work, the way she thought about space, what a place is supposed to feel like before you touch it and what you are trying to return it to. I told her about my job, what I actually did, what I was good at, what I wanted to do more of. We talked about the places we had been and the places we wanted to go. She told me about a project she was about to start in Portugal and said the country had been reshaping her sense of what she wanted her life to look like. On the third day, she asked if I had ever considered spending more time in Europe. I said I had thought about it, the way you think about things that feel like they belong to a different version of your life. She said she had felt exactly that way right up until she stopped feeling that way. She gave me her contact information before she left for Crete ahead of me. We hugged goodbye on a dock and she told me to let her know how the rest of the trip went. I watched her board her ferry and thought, if nothing else, I am going to remember this trip as the one where I had a 2-day friendship with a Canadian landscape architect on a rocky beach in Greece, and that is more than most people get. I took the ferry to Crete the next morning. Then I went to the smaller island I had found in the research spiral. I will not name it because I am genuinely a little protective of it. What I will tell you is that it was small enough that the same people kept appearing at different spots throughout the day, the same families at breakfast and then at the harbor, and then at the taverna in the evening, so that by the third day you had nodded at everyone enough times that it started to feel like a neighborhood. I rented a scooter and drove around the perimeter of the island over 2 days. I swam every morning. I ate lunch at a place run by a woman who brought out whatever she had made that day with no menu and no discussion. I sat at a table by the water every evening and wrote in a notebook I had bought at a stall near the ferry terminal. I was not writing about him, not really. Or maybe I was, but what I was actually writing was the longer thing underneath him, the version of my life I had been building around someone else's timeline and someone else's comfort, and what I thought it might look like to build it around my own instead. I had never actually asked myself that question before. Not directly, not seriously. I had always known what I wanted in a vague future tense kind of way, but I had never sat down and asked what I wanted right now, this year, in the next version of my life that I was going to have to build whether I wanted to or not. Sitting at that table every night with that notebook, I started to answer it. Some of the answers surprised me. Some of them did not surprise me at all, which was its own revelation because it meant I had already known and had just been choosing not to look at it. On the 9th day, my phone rang. It was him. I had posted a few photos on my account over the trip. Not many, not curated, just real ones. A plate of food, the water from a ferry, a sunset I could not help photographing. I had not thought much about who was seeing them. He had seen them. He said he had been thinking. He said he had made a mistake. He said seeing me out there, seeing me just living like that, it made him realize what he was giving up and he wanted to talk. I was standing in the ferry terminal when he called. I had my carry-on next to me. I had a boarding pass on my phone for a flight that was not the return flight home. A few days earlier, I had looked at the cost of changing my return ticket. It was not cheap, but it was not impossible, and I had found a reason that felt important. Celeste had messaged me about the Portugal project. She had said she was about to do a site visit outside Lisbon and had mentioned, half-jokingly I think, that if I had any interest in tagging along for a few days before flying home, she had a couch with my name on it. I had messaged back and said I was going to take her up on that, and she had sent a voice note that was mostly laughing and then said, "I was hoping you would say that." So when he called, I was already somewhere else. Not emotionally, literally. I was in a ferry terminal holding a boarding pass to Lisbon. I let him finish. He said, "So can we talk when you get back?" I said, "I am actually not coming back right away." He asked where I was going. I told him Portugal. There was a pause. He said Portugal. I said yes. He asked when I was coming home. I said I was not totally sure yet. He said, "I do not understand what is happening." I said, "I know, take care of yourself," and I hung up. The ferry horn went off. I picked up my bag and got in line. I want to be careful about how I tell the end of this because I think there is a version of this story where it becomes only about that phone call and the satisfying image of him on the other end while I was already boarding. And yes, that moment was something. I am not going to pretend it was not. But that is not the part that changed my life. The part that changed my life was the beach on the second day, and a woman with a canvas tote asking if the spot next to me was taken, and 2 hours of conversation that reframed the entire previous week for me. You canceled everything and kept the part you planned for yourself. I had not known I was doing that until she named it. Once she named it, I could not unknow it. I spent 4 days in Portugal. Celeste's site was about an hour outside Lisbon, a coastal property she was turning into something wild and lived in for a family who had owned it for years but never known what to do with it. I tagged along on 2 of her site visits and mostly stayed out of the way and watched her work, which was its own kind of education. In the evenings we ate well and talked too late, and she introduced me to a few people she knew in the city. On my last night she asked me what I was going to do when I went home. I said I was going to figure out what I actually wanted and stop organizing my life around what made other people comfortable. She said that was a good answer. I said I was still working on what it meant practically. She said that was also a good answer, and that most people never even get to the first part. I flew home 2 weeks after I had originally planned to. He texted a few more times. I responded to one of them briefly and then stopped. There was not much to say, not because I was angry, although I had been, but because I had already moved into a different conversation, one that was harder and more interesting and more worth my time, the one I was having with myself about what I actually wanted my life to look like. That conversation is still going. I do not have a clean resolution to hand you. I am not engaged again. I did not fall in love with a stranger on the trip. There is no new relationship to point to as proof that everything worked out the way it was supposed to. What I have is a job I have started reshaping in a direction that makes more sense for who I actually am. A passport with new stamps, a notebook that is mostly full, a contact in Toronto who sends me voice notes when she is working on something interesting. A calendar alert for a trip I am planning for later this year, solo again, somewhere I found in a research spiral late at night, which is apparently just how I find places now. And I have this story. I share it because people keep asking me about the photos from that trip, about what it was like to go alone, about whether I was scared or sad or whether I regret anything. The honest answer is yes to all 3 and also no to all 3, depending on the day. I was scared and I went anyway. I was sad and I stayed present anyway. I regret some things and I would not change the decision anyway. If you are watching this and you are in the middle of something falling apart, I am not going to tell you it all happens for a reason. I do not believe that. Things fall apart sometimes and there is no clean explanation for it. What I will say is that there is sometimes, not always but sometimes, something on the other side of it that you could not have seen from where you were standing before. I could not have planned what that trip became. I only got there because I stopped canceling things that were mine. I think about that a lot. About how close I came to canceling that trip too. How the night before I left I opened the airline app and sat there for 20 minutes with my finger hovering over the refund request, and something, I still do not know exactly what, made me put the phone down and go to sleep instead. It was not courage, I was not feeling courageous. I was feeling empty and tired and unsure of everything, but I put the phone down, and the next morning I went to the airport. That is sometimes how the most important decisions happen. Not with clarity or certainty or some big dramatic moment of resolve. Just with a phone going back on the table and a car ride at 5 in the morning and a boarding pass you did not cancel. I am not the same person who planned that trip 18 months ago for 2 people and a future that did not work out. I am not sure I would want to be. The person I am now makes decisions from a different place. Slower in some ways, more deliberate. Less willing to organize herself around whatever is easiest for everyone else in the room. That is still a work in progress. Probably it always will be, but I know what it feels like now to make a choice that is fully mine with no one else's hand in it, and I am not willing to forget that feeling. If this hit something in you, subscribe and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next one. Leave a comment if you have ever done something like this, kept the one thing that was yours when everything else fell apart. I read every single one. I will see you in the next video.